Hello, everyone, and Happy New Year. It's 2024, and you're connecting here with the podcast series, What's New in ArchLou. I'm Brian Reynolds, the Chancellor with the Archdiocese, and this show highlights the people, ministries, and activities of the Archdiocese of Louisville, the Catholic Church in Central Kentucky. Join us each month as we welcome guests to discuss what's new in the Archdiocese and invite you to get involved as you deepen your own engagement with your faith. This program is brought to you by the ArchLou Podcast Network. I can't believe it's 2024. Okay, we have a really special show today. I want to welcome our special guest, Cheryl Bruner, who's here. You're going to hear from her in a minute. She's an attorney with the firm of Pitt and Emison here in Louisville, specializing in the areas of estate planning, probate, and asset protection. Cheryl and her husband, Bart, are members of St. Michael's Parish and have 2 grown children. Cheryl, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Brian. Nice to be here.
Yeah, great to have you. So, Cheryl, before we get into our content today, how about a few minutes to introduce yourself a little more to us, maybe about your background, your family, where you hail from?
Yeah, I grew up in Owensboro.
Oh, okay, Western Kentucky.
That's right.
Yeah. Barbecue.
Yes, the best. I'm glad you know that.
I do. Yes, that's right. It's not good for me, but I like it a lot.
My husband's a teacher at St. X High School.
Right.
Our son graduated from there, and our daughter graduated from Assumption High School.
We paralleled the same way. My wife's a teacher there, and my son graduated from X, my daughter from Assumption. See, we're just paralleling here. So we could do an old home week conversation here about our kids growing up. They're both grown now, right?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Well, the reason that we invited you today is because you've been working with the Archdiocese and with our Office of Mission Advancement for the last couple of years on presentations to parishioners that provide immensely helpful information about estate planning. You've also worked with several of our priests. This podcast we wanted to do this month was going to look at kind of an abbreviated version of some of the talks you've given around the diocese, because we wanted our listeners to benefit from these concepts. Obviously, you can't give a whole presentation in a short podcast here, but you can give us some of the ideas. I'll ask you some of the basic questions. So we're going to look at topics like estate planning, probate, advanced directives, asset protection, and opportunities for charitable giving. Now, if that hasn't put everybody to sleep, wait till you listen to these great concepts here. These are important topics for all of us to think about. So help me get started with this.
Right.
Cheryl, what is estate planning?
So estate planning is a broad term, and it really includes making decisions and preparing legal documents for people that you need during your lifetime, if you become disabled or incapacitated, and then even after death. And then elder law is a subset of estate planning. And not all estate planning attorneys practice elder law. That encompasses planning for our later years in life with the potential that long-term care might be needed later.
I know you've been doing, that's your profession, of course, but also you've been helping in our churches. Do you think it's good that the church is opening up these topics for parishioners? We're glad that you're doing it for us, but what's your sense of that?
Yeah, it really is good, because the things that keep people from planning are they just don't know or they procrastinate. And when they see the information out there, they become more knowledgeable and ready to make those decisions.
Is that something that everybody needs to do?
Everyone needs to do.
Okay, all right. So
it is not just for older people.
Yeah, that's one of the myths, I think, that you worry about that later in life, but it's actually important. So I guess I want to know a little more about that. When should people start thinking about things like these issues of estates and planning and so forth?
Well, we commonly see young married couples. Once you have a child, if you want to make a decision about who would be the guardians of your children if you pass away, that's a time when people start to plan as well.
Okay. Let's go a little bit deeper into some of those things. Like I'm thinking about besides the end of life and kids, there's other words that I know are part of the topic areas, healthcare directives and powers of attorney and so forth. So if you can help us, what are some, if I was coming to you with an empty slate, I don't know where to begin. What are some key points you maybe could help me with? What is the key points to make?
Well, let's start with this. You might think you don't have a plan, but you do.
Okay.
Everyone has an estate plan. Because if you haven't written one yourself, the state has written one for you.
Oh, my goodness. Okay.
And it's very likely that that's not the plan you would like to have.
Okay.
So if you don't want to follow the state's default plan, you need to take steps to get the documents in place. Mm-hmm. So if you do not make a plan, you'll be in courtrooms with judges for a long time. But by making a plan and having your documents in place, you can avoid that.
Is there can we name some of those documents maybe?
Right.
Want to get in place?
Let's talk about some of the documents you need during lifetime.
Good.
Okay. A power of attorney. So let's give an example. Let's say there's a storm and a tree falls on the house and the husband and wife are injured.
Okay.
They're in the hospital. Someone needs to step in and call the insurance company and deal with the contractors and call the utility. That's your power of attorney. That's the person that you've authorized to stand in your shoes and act on your behalf when you can't.
Okay. So it doesn't just automatically become my next of kin?
No, it doesn't.
Oh, it doesn't. Okay. So how does someone pick our power of attorney?
Someone that you trust.
Okay. Yeah, if they're going to make those decisions, I guess I should trust them.
Someone that you're willing to let know a little bit about you and your affairs.
Okay.
Yeah. So oftentimes it might be for husband and wife, each other. Mm-hmm. But if they can't be there for each other, it has to be someone else.
Okay.
A sibling, a best friend, a parent, an adult child.
Okay. Okay, the first one, power of attorney. What else? What's next?
Okay. So in my example, they're in the hospital, right? So if you can't make healthcare decisions for yourself, someone else has to make those. That's a healthcare power of attorney.
Is that the same as the healthcare directive, or is that something different?
Yes, they go by different names,
Okay.
and the content can be a little bit different. So I'll divide it into two. The healthcare power of attorney lets someone make healthcare decisions for you if you can't make them for yourself.
Okay.
But there's an additional document called a living will, or sometimes advance directive, and that's where you can make your end-of-life wishes known. So if you are deemed to be permanently unconscious or terminally ill, you can make your wishes known about having your life prolonged by a ventilator or a feeding tube.
So that's decisions individuals get to make. It's not just decided by the doctors.
That's right. Some of us might recall the famous case of Terry Chavo in Florida. Yeah. So the details about that, in 1990, when she was 26, she had a heart attack. And she was deemed to be in a permanent vegetative state. And she didn't have any documents. So her husband and parents tried everything to get her back. She was so young. And after many years, her husband went to the court to ask the court to let her die naturally and remove the feeding tube. But her parents objected. Wow. That led to a legal battle for years and years more. Finally, in 2005, the feeding tube was removed. So this heart attack happened in 1990. And because she had no legal documents in place, because her husband and parents disagreed, this went on for 15 years.
My goodness. So it's really it's really to free other people up from being caught in that kind of disagreement or tension, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, it must have been a tragic experience for them anyway, but if they're at odds with each other. So the advanced directives or medical power of attorney, someone in place who has that authority, and that's recognized by the law.
Right. And states have their own laws on that. Mm-hmm. In Kentucky, you can find a Kentucky Living Will packet online.
Okay.
On our state attorney general's website. So ag.ky.gov.
Okay, very good.
And it's a very nice instructional packet with the form. So you can go there, print that out, and take care of that even without seeing a lawyer.
And of course, this is all for when you're living. So that's not about end of life necessarily. That's just living. You need those kinds of documents in place. If something happens to you or you're unconscious or whatever. Yeah.
That's right.
Very good.
Right.
Okay.
So that covers some of the documents
Yeah.
during life.
Yeah.
Power of attorney, healthcare power of attorney, Kentucky living will.
Mm-hmm. Great.
So then we get to a number of other documents that you would need upon your passing.
Okay.
So first and most commonly that people probably know of is a will.
Mm-hmm.
A will can be thought of as the instructions to the court on what you want done with your assets when you die. Some people think a will keeps them out of court, but on the contrary, a will sends you to court into a process called the probate process.
Okay. What are the elements that go in a will? I know you said it's about what have to do with your assets, but what goes in the will?
Well, if you have minor children, a will is where you nominate the guardians who would take care of your children when you pass away.
Okay.
Another thing in your will is that you say where you want your property to go. You can have very specific gifts of items or of money to people, to charities, to organizations, and then there's the rest.
Yeah.
So it's very common. You can imagine that husbands and wives often leave everything to each other. So even sometimes in that situation, we don't even have to go to probate court if husbands and wives own everything jointly. But most commonly, when the second spouse passes away, perhaps they're leaving most things to their children, some gifts to their churches or charities, and then you do go to the court for the probate process. So first I want to say we have some very capable, compassionate judges that run our probate court.
Okay.
But the process is long and can be expensive. And it's public. Everything becomes a public record.
So so you can't avoid that, right? Is that what you're saying? Unless you own things jointly?
You can avoid it, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit.
Okay.
Maybe after we finish talking about wills and probate.
Okay.
So the probate process, I gave a talk last week, and I asked if anyone had been through it. And 2 people said yes, and I said, well, what did you think about it? And they both used the same adjective, horrible.
Oh, dear. Oh, dear.
So with probate, when someone passes away, you contact an attorney who starts to prepare the documents needed. So those get filed with the probate court. And in about 4 or 5 weeks, the court will have a hearing to appoint the executor. So you go to court, the executor is appointed. That's the person who is tasked with wrapping up the affairs of the deceased person. So once the executor is appointed, the process goes on, and that case must remain open for at least 6 months. That 6-month period is to allow any creditors to come forward for any unpaid claims, an unpaid medical bill, an outstanding credit card debt, back taxes, things like that. So over the course of that 6 months, the claims are all settled. And then in a simple case, you can start to wrap things up after that. So you can see that even in the most simple of probate cases, from start to finish, usually takes at least 1 year.
You mentioned the court appointing an executor. I'm happy to say I have some of these documents in place, and I believe in my will I named an executor. Does the court have to pay attention to that, or can they choose somebody else?
Now, who you have named as your executor is the first one to come forward and serve in that role if they're willing to.
Oh, okay.
Sometimes you see people say, I don't want to do that. I can't do that. Maybe their own health is poor. Maybe they've got things going on with their family. They live out of state. They just don't want to do it. So it's a good idea to not only name one, but at least a backup.
Okay, very good.
And if no one is willing to do it, then another family member can step forward and raise their hand to serve.
Okay, very good. Okay, that's probate.
Yes.
What's next?
Well, So another way of handling your planning is by having a trust.
Okay, tell us about a trust.
Okay. A trust is a private agreement. A trust can keep you out of probate court. A trust is a contract that you make with yourself. If you're a married couple and you make a trust together, then you're making an agreement with each other and yourselves. One thing about a trust is that it can govern your affairs during your lifetime, if you become disabled, and after you pass away. So it's very different than a will in that respect. One way that it's similar to a will is that in your trust you can say how you want your assets distributed upon your death. So it has that similarity. But a trust can do so much more that a will cannot do.
Okay, I want to learn about that.
So, for instance, have you ever seen the unfortunate scenario where one spouse dies, leaves everything to the other spouse, and then the widowed spouse gets remarried, which can be a wonderful, joyous thing.
Yeah.
But often we see in that situation that the widowed spouse who has remarried will leave everything to the new spouse. And how that can create tensions in families is that the children from the original marriage get left out sometimes.
Oh, okay.
So planning with just a will can sometimes result in that unfortunate scenario. But a trust can help a married couple prevent that from happening. Because in the trust, the husband and wife together are deciding what will happen after the first one dies and what will happen after the second one dies.
And that's all written in the trust?
Right.
Okay.
Right. So we call that protecting the children's inheritance and protecting the married couple's wishes against the effects of a subsequent remarriage. So that's one of the benefits that married couples planning with a trust can provide. Another benefit is whether you're single or married, a trust keeps you out of probate, and it's private, it's not public, and it can happen very quickly. I recently had a St. Edward family in my office where the father had passed away, and the 4 adult children were there, and mom and dad had a trust. And we were able to wrap everything up within 1 month of dad passing away. So very different than the year or 2 years that the probate process would take.
Okay. Can I ask you what? I have more questions about this, but because you just used yourself as an example, this type of attorney work you do, that's really personal with people, isn't it? I guess many things in the law are, but this is. Tell me about what's the role of the individual attorney in that process?
Well, you're right. All areas of the law are very personal,
Yeah.
and the attorney-client privilege is there to keep things confidential. So when you go see a lawyer, whether you know them, go to church with them, you're friends with them, they still have a duty, an obligation to keep everything confidential.
Okay.
So you can know that that protection is there. But dealing with people contemplating their own death can be very emotional too. So taking the time to listen, understand their concerns, what their goals are, because as I mentioned, people procrastinate doing this because it's not a joyful thing to think about.
Yeah.
So taking your time with those clients and really listening to try to help them come up with a solution. They call lawyers counselors at law.
Yeah.
So we are counselors in certain respects in that way
good.
too.
Very good. I may come back to that later on. I know there's a topic, and I don't know whether these are included under it, called asset protection. Is that what this is generally seen, or is that something separate?
So asset protection is a way to protect your assets against a variety of things. It could be certain types of taxes. It could be the cost of long-term care. So that's a very common one.
Okay,
Maybe we should get into
Yes.
that one. So let me mention a few terms that maybe you've heard of, things like the Medicaid spend down or the Medicaid 5-year look-back period. These terms have to do with how and when Medicaid would cover the cost of long-term care for someone. We all know that actually most of us will need some form of long-term care in our lifetime. It is very expensive.
Yeah.
There are basically 3 ways to pay for it. You can private pay from your own income and savings and other assets. Some people have a form of long-term care insurance. And the third way is Medicaid. Oftentimes, it's a combination of those 3 things that are used to pay for that care. So, when we're looking at Medicaid, in Kentucky, Medicaid will cover the cost of skilled nursing care in certain circumstances. But essentially, it's deemed a payor of last resort when people don't have the money to pay for it. If you're a single person, Medicaid expects you to spend everything you have until you have $2,000 left. And then Medicaid will cover nursing home care.
Everything you have? So all of your other assets?
Right.
My goodness. That leaves nothing for anybody else.
Right. And it doesn't leave anything to pay for your own extra needs.
Yeah.
If you need a new set of hearing aids and you want some new bifocals, there can be expenses that you have that there's no money left to pay for. So out of your monthly income, if you're in a nursing home, you're allowed to keep $40 per month. Now, that won't pay for my haircut and color. So people explore methods to protect some of their assets because we all would like to be able to take care of ourselves for our lifetime and not be a financial burden on other people in our family. So protecting some of the assets can help ensure that you've got the money for those necessities once you're in a nursing home. So for a married couple, though, you don't have to spend everything. A married couple, all assets are looked at jointly. Whether they're in husband's name or wife's name, it doesn't matter. For purposes of Medicaid, all the assets are looked at jointly. So when we have clients come in, if they're married couples or single people, we have to assess their entire asset picture, and we have to look at all their sources of income. And we educate on how and when Medicaid will cover things. So one of the methods that we use to protect assets is an irrevocable trust. So I haven't mentioned that yet. There are revocable trusts and irrevocable. So when we're looking at asset protection for Medicaid, it's the irrevocable type of trust that we use. And by placing certain assets into an irrevocable trust, after 5 years of being in that trust, they are essentially invisible to Medicaid and that 5-year look-back period that I mentioned earlier. So planning in advance is important.
Yeah, so if it's been in the trust, irrevocable trust, for that period of time, then that becomes part of someone's estate later on, or whatever the trust is guiding it to, right?
Right. Once it's in the irrevocable trust for 5 years, that asset is invisible to Medicaid.
Okay, very good. All right, we've done wills, we've done advance directives, we've done trusts, we've done all of this power of attorneys. This is good. There's a lot of stuff here. It can be overwhelming. Do you find that when you talk to people about this, they glass over, or how do you do this? That's hard work.
Mm-hmm. It is a lot to take in because the education is first. Many people, again, they know what a will is or feel like they know what a will is. But a lot of these other documents are new to people. So just starting with education. I've got a flip chart in my office. I draw on the flip chart, prepare diagrams for them. Here's a picture of things. So really starting with the education. Many attorneys, when they're undertaking this kind of representation, will ask the new client to fill out some kind of worksheet. And by filling out a worksheet, it allows that new client time to think about things. Oh, I forgot I had that credit union account. So they contemplate and they write down their assets. They answer some questions about what some of their concerns are, what some of their goals are. And by doing that, it helps them get into a frame of mind for the meeting. And then by the attorney reviewing that, maybe the day before the meeting, then the attorney becomes a little bit familiar with that new client, with maybe their ages, their family situation, what some of their stated concerns are. So that initial meeting can be very productive by both sides spending a little time in advance to prepare for it. Okay. And I think that helps people be a little bit more at ease about the topic.
You said a couple of those things, like the Kentucky has on their webpage some of these materials for like a will or power of attorney, advanced directives, I guess. But when you start getting into trust and so forth, then you need an attorney. Is that correct?
So, yes, I did mention the Kentucky Living Will is online, and it is valid at every hospital and doctor's office in the state of Kentucky. There is also a power of attorney statute in Kentucky. So you can go to that and print out a type of a form from the Kentucky statute where you can pick and choose what you are giving someone authority over. But there is no form will as part of the statute,
okay,
and there is no form trust. So both of those have very specific legal requirements. For example, in Kentucky, if you have a will, you certainly want it to be valid when it's presented to the court. And to be valid, it has to be signed by the person making the will, who's called the testator. It has to be signed in the presence of 2 disinterested witnesses and a notary public.
Oh, okay.
So if you just print something off the internet and want to do it yourself and you have failed to do 2 disinterested witnesses and a notary, that will not be automatically accepted by the court in the probate process. There will be more to it, whether it's accepted at all.
Okay, so the court could ignore that if they wanted to or had a question about it.
Right. So in doing a will or a trust, certainly the best practice is to work with an attorney knowledgeable in those things.
Yeah. Very good. I want to talk about, sometimes when you hear people talk about end of life, they talk about making donations or gifts to charity. Can you help us understand that? That's another concept area, I think, right?
Yeah, and I see it all the time. I am humbled and overwhelmed sometimes by the generosity of the clients that I get to work with. So, people, as they're contemplating their final disposition of assets, sometimes people think, well, my children don't need all of this. Or sometimes they feel like they want to leave money to causes or organizations that are meaningful to them. There's a variety of reasons, a variety of motivations that people have. I hear people talk about that's what their parents taught them, that you should leave something to your church, to your school. I hear people talk about the impact that a ministry has had on them or the impact that their high school or college had on them. Lots of different reasons that people talk about why they want to leave charities or other organizations money. And so we talk about the variety of ways to do it. Some are very simple that you could think, give X dollars to my alma mater upon my death, or give X percentage to my church upon my death. Those are maybe the most common, easy to understand. But there are so many ways that people can make a donation during lifetime, upon their death, or even at some time following their death. So I help them understand all those different ways, and we work together to find what seems to be the right one for them.
Very good. So it's not necessarily what you suggested there of just in the will give this money to my church, but they could do pre-death giving, if you would.
Right,
and
right.
Or
Planned
even
giving during
later,
life.
or something later on after you die from the trust or some other purpose. Very good.
Right.
You said there's lots of motivations. Can you just name one or two? What you said motivation because they could gain something. Why are people motivated to give at the end of their life?
Oh gosh. Well, my mother always taught us about tithing. She set a wonderful example. I can remember even when she was unemployed one time, she was tithing from her unemployment check. Wow. So, she was a wonderful example to me and all of my siblings. So I think that just being taught that and passing that on as a value and a belief system in families is something I see a lot of and have experienced myself. Again, as I talk to clients, many people recognize everything we have is a gift from God. It's not ours to be treasured. It's His to give to us to use for His benefit. So having the opportunity to have conversations like that with people, I really enjoy. And I'm always trying to get to know my clients about, what's meaningful to you. How do you spend your time? And it might be volunteering at the Cathedral Soup Kitchen. It might be unloading boxes at Dare to Care. It might be mentoring someone at the YMCA. But I like to hear about and find out with clients what is important to them. And in fact, sometimes when I bring it up, have you thought about leaving that organization something? Sometimes people say, no, I haven't thought about that until now. Yeah. So it leads to a really nice conversation because not only have they not thought about that, they don't want to think about dying at all. Yeah, so right. I'm sort of forcing the subject for them to think about a lot of things as they approach that planning.
I know when people can have that inkling or that understanding that, wow, what I did in my life is going on beyond my life because I made a gift. That's a wonderful concept there. Cheryl, we get lots of great feedback about the presentations you've conducted in our churches. I know this is part of your own giving back because you do a lot of good work for the church in this community and obviously your profession. Tell me about the connection, if you can, and a little personal here, between your faith and your work.
Yeah, I really do enjoy what I do. My clients see that and notice that. I like to help people. I really am a believer that our talents are from God and we're to use those for His benefit and His glory. And so with this law degree that I have had for so many years, using it to help people with this planning is just really something I enjoy. And I think I make it easier for them when they leave my office and they have that peace of mind, that comfort that they have a plan in place and they feel good about their plan and they know that I'm available and they just have to call me. I get a lot of satisfaction that I'm using my knowledge and training in a way that's very needed and very helpful to people. And I also work with a lot of great people. There are 4 of us attorneys in our office, and we have a wonderful legal assistant as well. And so we're really a great team. I think our clients see that as well. So it's really a fulfilling and enjoyable law practice.
Well, what we've heard, and you've made it clear in our conversation today, you make a complex topic into bite-sized pieces. I got a lot of learnings today. And second, you make something more approachable because you're approachable. So I want to thank you for what you're doing around this community and for your commitment to this type of work because we need people like you for all of us. And the fact that, frankly, the church gets to benefit from it, all the better. So I thank you for that. And we thank our viewers and our listeners for tuning in to What's New in ArchLou for January. Hope you can tune in again next month. We'll have a new guest and a new topic.